Hello everybody, welcome to Silmarillion Sunday. I am Don Marshall 72. We are reading from, nope, let me try that again, 3-2. Hello YouTube, welcome to Silmarillion Sunday. I am Don Marshall 72, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy. If you've never seen the stream before, this is where I read from the Silmarillion and give my commentary throughout to explain maybe the more difficult parts. This will be part 22 and the last part in sort of the main chunk of the Silmarillion story that most people know, called the Quenta Silmarillion, everything that has to do with the First Age. When we last left off, Tuor and his wife Idril? I think it's Idril. Yes, Tuor and his wife Idril left the hidden elven city of Gondolin, fled with their people to the Grey Havens after Morgoth, Sauron's master, attacked the hidden city, and yeah, it was a bad time. A lot of people died. But they have since sailed off into the Undying Lands, maybe, we don't know. And we will now start with chapter 24 with their son, Eärendil. Now, if you've been watching my Twitch videos or my TikToks for any point in time, you might recognize his name. This is Elrond's dad. And this is the story of how Elrond's dad kind of saves the world. Let me explain. All right. For those of you that want to hang out on Twitch with a live stream, I stream every Wednesday at noon, or excuse me, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern and noon on Sundays. Sorry, and every Sunday at noon Eastern. So come on, check out the streams, and let's get right into it. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek because, as my Twitch chat knows, this is like my fourth time trying to film the intro because my dog and script mess-ups, and yeah. All right. Let's begin. Chapter 24 of the Voyage of Eärendil and the War of Wrath. Bright Eärendil was the lord of the people that dwelt nigh to Sirion's mouth. Sirion is a river. And he took to wife Elwing the Fair, and she bore to him Elrond and Elros, who are called the Half-Elven. Yet Eärendil could not rest, and his voyages about the shores of the hitherlands eased not his unquiet. Two purposes grew in his heart, blended as one in longing for the sea, for the wide sea. He sought to sail thereon, seeking after Tuor and Idril, who did not return, and thought to find perhaps the last shore, and bring, ere he died, the message of elves and men to the Valar in the west, that should move their hearts to pity for the sorrows of Middle-earth. Now Eärendil became fast in friendship with Círdan the shipwright, who dwelt in the Isle of Balar, with those of his people who had escaped the sack of the havens of Brithombar and Eglarest. You don't have to worry about where those places are. With the aid of Círdan, Eärendil built Vingilot, the foam flower, fairest of the ships of song. Golden were its oars and white its timbers, hewn with the birch woods of Nimbrithel, which is a forest, and its sails were as an argent moon. In the Lay of Eärendil is many a thing sung of his adventures in the deeps and the lands untrodden, and in many seas and in many isles. But Elwing was not with him, and she sat in sorrow by the mouths of Sirion. To briefly explain there, the Lay of Eärendil is italicized, and it is another version of this story. If you haven't caught on by now, there are many different versions of a lot of Tolkien stories. He had a lot of drafts. Eärendil did not find Tuor, nor Idril, nor came he ever on the journey to the shores of Valinor, defeated by shadows and enchantments, driven by repelling winds, longing until in longing for Elwing, excuse me, apologies, until in longing for Elwing he turned homeward toward the coast of Beleriand, and his heart bade him haste, for a sudden fear had fallen on him out of dreams, and the winds before that before he had striven with might, not now bear him back as swift as his desire. Now when first the tidings came to Maethros, which is one of the sons of Feanor, that Elwing yet lived, and dwelt in possession of a Silmaril by the mouths of Sirion, and he, repenting the deeds in Doriath, withheld his hand. But in time the knowledge of their oath unfulfilled returned to torment him and his brothers. Gathering from their wanderings hunting paths, they sent messages to the havens of friendship and yet of stern demand. Yet Elwing and the people of Sirion would not yield the jewel which Beren had won and Luthien had worn, and for which Dior the Fair was slain. And least of all, while Eärendil their lord was on at sea. For it seemed to them that in the Silmaril lay the healing and the blessing that had come upon their houses and their ships. And so there came to pass the last and cruelest of the slayings of elf by elf, and that was the third of the great wrongs achieved by the accursed oath. So just a brief recap. Maethros, which is one of the sons of Feanor, the elf that brought everybody over from the Undying Lands. I'm going to do a lot of recap on this one because I feel like it's important to get the context, because this is it. This is it. So Feanor had 7 sons, and those sons made a vow with Feanor to always have the Silmarils. And in doing so, this curse is very similar. I always draw similarities to the unbreakable vows in Harry Potter, where if you break them in break an unbreakable vow in Harry Potter, you die. If you don't hold to your oath in Tolkien's world, you can be tormented and will inevitably probably lead to your death in one way or another. So the sons of Feanor are compelled to get this Silmaril that is, easier to get than the ones that Morgoth has on his crown. For the sons of Feanor that yet lived came down upon the exiles of Gondolin and the remnants of Doriath and destroyed them. In that battle, some of their people stood aside, and some few rebelled and were slain upon the other part aiding Elwing against their own lords. For such was the sorrow and confusion in the hearts of the Eldar in those days. But Maethros and Maglor won the day, though they alone remained thereafter of the sons of Feanor, for both Amrod and Amras were slain. Too late, the ships of Círdan and Gil-galad the High King came hasting to the aids of the elves of Sirion, and Elwing was gone, and her sons. Then such few of that people as did not perish in the assault joined themselves to Gil-galad. It may also be Gil-galad, just full disclosure. I have always pronounced it Gil-galad, but I could be wrong about that one. Then such few people that did not perish in the assault joined themselves to Gil-galad, and went with him to Balar. And they told that Elros and Elrond were taken captive, but Elwing, with a Silmaril upon her breast, had cast herself into the sea. Thus Maethros and Maglor gained not the jewel, but it was not lost, for Ulmo bore up Elwing out of the waves, and he gave her the likeness of a great white bird, and upon her breast there shone as a star the Silmaril, as she flew over the waters to seek Eärendil her beloved. Ulmo, you'll remember, is one of the Valar, one of the lesser gods over in the Undying Lands. Also, thank you to whoever said that the music is still playing. Apologies, I usually try and mute that when I actually start the readings, but it is paused now. Hang on. I missed my part. On a time of night, Eärendil at the helm of his ship saw her come towards him, as a white cloud exceeding swift beneath the moon. At the start, as a star over the sea moving in strange course, a pale flame on the wings of storm. And it is sung that she fell from the air upon the timbers of Vingilot, in a swoon nigh unto death, for the urgency of her speed. And Eärendil took her to his bosom, And in the morning, with marveling eyes, he beheld his wife in her own form beside him, with great hair, with her hair upon his face. And she slept. Great was the sorrow of Eärendil and Elwing for the ruin of the havens of Sirion, and the captivity of their sons. And they feared that they would be slain. But it was not so, for Maglor took pity upon Elros and Elrond, and he cherished them. And love grew between them, as little might be thought. But Maglor's heart was sick and weary with the burden of the dreadful oath. Yet Eärendil saw now no hope left in the land of Middle-earth, and he turned again in despair, and came not home, but sought back once more to Valinor with Elring at his side. He stood now most often at the prow of Vingulot, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow, and ever its light grew greater as they drew into the west. And the wise have said that it was by reason of the power of that holy jewel that they came in time to waters that no vessel save those of the Teleri had known. You'll remember the Teleri are the elves from the Undying Lands that stayed in the Undying Lands that were eventually massacred by Feanor and his people. They are still there, but they know those waters. And they came to the enchanted isles and escaped their enchantment. And they came to the shadowy seas and passed their shadow. And they looked upon Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, but tarried not. Tol Eressëa is that island that they moved from the Middle-earth area to the Undying Lands, the giant flying island across the sea from the very beginning. That's how they got the elves over to the Undying Lands. And at last they cast anchor in the Bay of Eldamar, and the Teleri saw the coming of that ship out of the east, and they were amazed, gazing from afar upon the light of the Silmaril, and it was very great. Then Eärendil, first of living men, landed in the immortal shores, and he spoke there to Elwing and to those that were with him. And they were three mariners who had sailed all the seas beside him: Falathar, Elrilot, and Eärendil. It sounds like Elendil, it sounds like Eärendil, so I didn't want to mispronounce it. And Eärendil said to them, "Here none but myself shall set foot, lest you fall under the wrath of the Valar. But that peril I will take on myself alone, for the sake of the two kindreds." But Elwing answered, "Then would our paths be sundered forever. But all thy peril I will take on myself also." And she leapt onto the white foam and ran towards him. But Eärendil was sorrowful, for he feared the anger of the lords of the west upon any of Middle-earth that should dare to pass any leaguer of Aman. Aman is the Undying Lands. And there they bade him farewell to the companions of their voyage, and were taken from them forever. Then Eärendil said to Elwing, "Await me here, for one only may bring the message that is to my fate to bear." And he went up alone into the land, and came into the Calakiria. And it seemed to him empty and silent, for even as Morgoth and Ungoliant came in ages past, so now Eärendil came at a time of festival, and well nigh all the elven folk were gone to Valimar, or were gathered in the halls of Manwë upon Taniquetu, and few were left to keep watch upon the walls of Tirion. But some there were who saw him from afar, and the great light that he bore, and they went in haste to Valimar. But Eärendil climbed the green hills of Tuna, and found it bare. And he entered into the streets of Tirion, and they were empty, and his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come even to the blessed realm. And he walked in the deserted ways of Tirion. Sorry, my dog just sat on all my laundry. And he walked the deserted halls of Tirion, and the dust upon his raiment and his shoes was the dust of diamonds. And he shone and glistened as he climbed the long white stairs. And he called aloud in many tongues, both of elves and men, but there were none to answer him. Therefore he turned back at last towards the sea, and even as he took the shoreward road, one stood upon a hill and called to him in a great voice, saying, Hail, Earendil, of mariners most renowned, the looked for that cometh at unawares, the longed for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Earendil, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of the earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning. That voice was the voice of Eonwe, herald of Manwe, and he came from Valimar, and summoned Earendil to come before the powers of Arda. And Earendil went to Valinor, and to the halls of Valmar, and never set foot upon the lands of men. Then the Valar took counsel together, and they summoned Ulmo from the deeps of the sea, and Earendil stood before their faces, and delivered the errand of the two kindred. Pardon he asked for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and mercy upon men and elves, and succor for their need. And his prayer was granted. It is told among the elves that after Earendil had departed, seeking Elwing his wife, Mandos spoke concerning their fates. And he said, Shall mortal man step living upon the undying lands, and yet live? But Ulmo said, For this he bore the war, for this he was born into the world. And say unto me, whether he is Earendil Tuor's son of the line of Hador, or the son of Idril Torgon's daughter of the elven house of Finwë. And Mandos answered, Equally the Noldor, who went willfully into exile, may not return hither. But when all was spoken, Manwe gave judgment, and he said, In this judgment, the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured for love of the two kindreds shall not fall upon Earendil, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife, who entered into peril for love of him. But they shall not walk again, ever among elves or men in the outer lands. And this is my decree concerning them. To Earendil and to Elwing, and to their sons, shall be given leave, each to choose freely to which kindred their fate shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged. This is how Arwen is able to choose to be with Aragorn as a mortal. Now when Earendil was long time gone, Elwing became lonely and afraid, and wandering by the margins of the sea, she came near to Alqualonde, and where lay the Teleri fleets. There the Teleri befriended her, and they listened to her tales of Doriath and Gondolin, and the griefs of Beleriand. And they were filled with pity and wonder. And there Earendil, returning, found her at the haven of the swans. But ere long they were summoned to Valimar, and there the decree of the Elder King was declared to them. Then Earendil said to Elwing, Choose thou, for now I am weary of the world. And Elwing chose to be judged among the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, because of Lúthien, and for her sake Earendil chose alike, though his heart was rather with the kindred of men and the people of his father. Then at the bidding of the Valar, Eonwe went to the shore of Aman, where the companions of Earendil still remained, awaiting tidings. And he took the boat, and the three mariners were set therein, and the Valar drove them away into the east with a great wind. But they took Vingilot, and hallowed it, and bore it away through Valinor to the uttermost rim of the world. And there it passed through the door of night, and was lifted up even into the ocean of heaven. Now fair and marvelous was that vessel, and it was filled with a wavering flame, pure and bright. And Earendil the mariner sat at the helm, glistening with the dust of elven gems, and the Silmaril was bound upon his brow. Far he journeyed in that ship, even into the starless void, but most often he was seen at morning or evening, glimmering in sunrise or sunset as he came back to Valinor from voyages beyond the confines of the world. On those journeys Elwing did not go, for she might not endure the cold and pathless void, and she loved rather the earth and the sweet winds that blow on sea and hill. Therefore there was built for her a white tower northward upon the border of the sundering seas, and thither at times all the seabirds of the earth repaired. Repaired like came back to rest, basically. And she loved rather, lost my place. And it is said that Elwing learned the tongues of birds, who herself had once worn their shape, and they taught her the craft of flight, and her wings were of white and silver gray. And at times, when Eärendil, returning, drew near to Arda, she would fly to meet him, even as she had flown long ago, when she was rescued from the sea. If you're getting some Disney Prince and Disney Princess vibes, you wouldn't be too far off. Then the far-sighted among the elves that dwelt in the lonely isle would see her like a white bird, shining, rose-stained in the sunset, as she soared in joy to greet the coming of Vingulot to haven. Now when first Vingulot was set to sail in the seas of heaven, it rose unlooked for, glittering and bright, and the peoples of Middle-earth beheld it from afar, and wondered, and they took it for a sign, and called it Gil Estel, the Star of High Hope. If you've read The Lord of the Rings, you may remember that Estel is Aragorn's elvish type name, because Estel means hope. Also, just a quick geography reminder, Middle-earth at this point is still flat. And so, because Eärendil's sign is so bright, it can be seen very, very far away, because it's basically like looking straight off into the distance. And when this new star was seen at evening, Maethros spoke to Maglor his brother and said, "Surely that is a Silmaril that shines now in the west." And Maglor answered, "If it be true, the Silmaril which we saw cast into the sea that rises again by the power of the Valar, then let us be glad, for its glory is now seen by many, and is yet secure from all evil." Then the elves looked up, and despaired no longer, but Morgoth was filled with doubt. Yet it is said that Morgoth looked not for the assault that came upon him from the west, for so great was his pride become, that he deemed that none would ever again come with open war against him. Moreover, he thought that he had forever estranged the Noldor from the lords of the west, and that content in their blissful realm, the Valar would heed no more his kingdom in the world without. For to him, that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange, and beyond reckoning. But the host of the Valar prepared for battle, and beneath their white banner marched the Vanyar, people of Ingwe, and those also of the Noldor that had never departed from Valinor, whose leader was Finarfin, son of Finwë. Few of the Teleri were willing to go forth to war, for they remembered the slaying of the Swanhaven and the rape of their ships. But they hearkened to Elwing, who was the daughter of Dior, and came of their own kindred, and they sent mariners enough to sail the ships that bore the host of the Valinor over the seas. Yet they stayed aboard their vessels, and none of them set foot upon the hitherlands. I love this part because we have come full circle. The Teleri are making the ships to go save the surviving Noldor. I love that. I love that so much. Y'all, this is it. Of the march of the host of the Valar to the north of Middle-earth, little is said in any tale. For among them went none of those elves that had dwelt and suffered in the hitherlands, and who made the histories of those days that are still known. And tidings of these things they only learned long afterwards from their kinsfolk in Amma. But at the last, the might of Valinor came up out of the west, and the challenge of the trumpets of Eonwe filled the sky, and Beleriand was ablaze with the glory of their arms. For the host of the Valar were arrayed in forms young and fair and terrible, and the mountains rang beneath their feet. The meeting of the host of the west and of the north is named the Great Battle, and the War of Wrath. There was marshaled the whole power of the throne of Morgoth, and it had become great beyond count, so that Anfauglith could not contain it, and all the north was aflame with war. But it availed him not, and the Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth. Sound familiar? Balrogs hiding in the deep places of the world? And the uncounted legions of the orcs perished like straw in a great flame, or were swept like shriveled leaves before the burning wind. Few remained to trouble the world for long years after. And such few as were left of the three houses of the elf friends, fathers of men, fought upon the part of the Valar, and they were avenged in those days. For Baragund and Barahir, Galdor and Gundor, Huor and Hurin, and many others of their lords. But a great part of the sons of men, whether of the people of Uldor or others new come out of the sea, marched with the enemy, and the elves did not forget it. Then, seeing that his hosts were overthrown and his power dispersed, Morgoth quailed, and he dare not come forth himself. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued winged dragons that had not before been seen. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the host of the Valar was driven back. And for the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. Are you ready to meet Caladan? But Earendil came, shining with a bright flame, and about Vingilot were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain. And there was battle in the air all that day and through the night. Before the rising of the sun, Earendil slew Caladan the Black, mightiest of the dragon host, and cast him from the sky, and he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. And Caladan is the size of a small mountain range. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed, and the might of the Valar descended into the deeps of the earth. There Morgoth stood at last, at bay, and yet unvaliant. He fled into the deepest of his mines and sued for peace and pardon. But his feet were hewn from under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was born with the chains of Aginor, which he had worn aforetime, the same shackles that the Valar put him in at the beginning of time. And his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck, and his head was bowed upon his knees. And the two Silmarils which remained to Morgoth were taken from his crown, and they shone unsullied beneath the sky. And Eonwe took them and guarded them. Thus an end was made of the power of Angband in the north, and the realm of evil was brought to naught. And out of the deep prisons a multitude of slaves came forth, beyond all hope, into the light of day, and they looked upon a world that was changed. For so great was the fury of their adversaries that the northern regions of the western world were rent asunder, and the sea roared in through many chasms, and there was confusion and great noise. And rivers perished or found new paths, and the valleys were upheaved, and the hills trod down, and Sirion was no more. Then Eonwe then Eonwe, as herald of the elder king, summoned the elves of Beleriand to depart from Middle-earth. But Maethros and Maglor would not hearken, and they prepared, though now with weariness and loathing, to attempt in despair the fulfillment of their oath. For they would have given battle for the Silmarils, were they withheld, even against the victorious host of Valinor, even though they stood alone against the world. And they sent a message, therefore, to Eonwe, bidding him yield up now those jewels which of old Feanor their father made and Morgoth stole from them. But Eonwe answered that the right to the work of their father, which the sons of Feanor formerly possessed, had now perished because of their many and merciless deeds, being blinded by their oath, and most of all because of their slaying of Dior and the assault upon the havens. The light of the Silmarils should now go into the west, whence it came in the beginning, and to Valinor must Maethros and Maglor declare, and there abide the judgment of Valar, by whose decree alone would Eonwe yield the jewels from his charge. Then Maglor desired to submit, for his heart was sorrowful, and he said, "The oath says not that we may not bide our time, and it may be that in Valinor all shall be forgiven and forgot, and we shall come into our own in peace." But Maethros answered that if they returned to Aman, but the favor of the Valar were withheld from them, then their oath would still remain, and its fulfillment be beyond all hope. And he said, "Who can tell to what dreadful doom we shall come if we disobey the powers in their own lands, or purpose ever to bring war into their holy realm?" Yet Maglor said back, saying, "If Manwë and Varda themselves denied the fulfillment of the oath to which we named them in witness, is it not made void?" And Maethros answered, "But how shall our voices reach to Ilúvatar beyond the circles of the world? And by Ilúvatar we swore in our madness, and called the everlasting darkness upon us, if we kept not our word. Who shall release us?" "If none can release us," said Maglor, "then indeed the everlasting darkness shall be our law, whether we keep our oath or break it. But less evil shall we do in the breaking." Yet he yielded at last to the will of Maethros, and they took counsel together how they should lay hands upon the Silmarils. And they disguised themselves, and came in the night to the camp of Eonwe, and crept into the place where the Silmarils were guarded. And they slew the guards, and laid hands on the jewels. Then all the camp was raised against them, and they prepared to die, and defending themselves until the last. But Eonwe would not permit the slaying of the sons of Feanor, and departing, unfought, they fled away. Each of them took to himself a Silmaril, for they said, "Since one is lost to us, and but two remain, and we two alone of our brothers, so it is plain that fate would have us share the heirlooms of our fathers." But the jewel burned the hand of Maethros in pain unbearable, and he perceived that it was as Eonwe had said, and that his right thereto had become void, and that the oath was in vain. And being in anguish and despair, he cast himself into a gaping chasm filled with fire, and so ended. And the Silmaril that he bore was taken into the bosom of the earth. And it is told of Maglor that he could not endure the pain with which the Silmaril tormented him, and he cast it at last into the sea. And thereafter he wandered ever upon the shores, singing in pain and regret beside the waves. For Maglor the Mighty was among the singers of old. For Maglor was mighty among the singers of old, named only after J.R.R. of Doriath. But he came never back among the people of the elves, and thus it came to pass that the Silmarils found their long homes, one in the airs of heaven, one in the fires of the heart of the world, and one in the deep waters. In those days, there was a great building of ships upon the shores of the western sea, and thence in many a fleet the Eldar set sail into the west, and came never back to the lands of weeping and war. And the Vanyar returned beneath their white banners, and were borne in triumph to Valinor. But their joy in victory was diminished, for they returned without the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown, and they knew that those jewels could not be found or brought together again unless the world be broken and remade. And when they came into the west, the elves of Beleriand dwelt upon Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, that looks both west and east, whence they might come even to Valinor. They were admitted again to the love of Manwë and the pardon of the Valar, and the Teleri forgave their ancient grief, and the curse was laid to rest. Yet not all of the Eldalë were willing to forsake the hitherlands, where they had long suffered and long dwelt, and some lingered many an age in Middle-earth. Among them were Círdan the shipwright, and Celeborn of Doriath, with Galadriel his wife, who alone remained of those who led the Noldor to exile in Beleriand. In Middle-earth dwelt also Gil-galad the High King, and with him was Elrond, half-elven, who chose, as was granted to him, to be numbered among the Eldar. But Elros, his brother, chose to abide with men, and from those brethren alone has come among men the blood of the firstborn. And a strain of the spirits divine that were before Arda. For they were the son of Elwing, Dior's daughter, Lúthien's son, child of Thingol and Melian. And remember, Melian is a Maya, one of those lesser spirits. And Eärendil, their father, was the son of Idril Celebrimbor, Torgon's daughter of Gondolin. But Morgoth himself, the Valar, thrust through the doors of night beyond the walls of the world into the timeless void, and a guard is set forever on those walls. And Eärendil keeps watch upon the ramparts of the sky. Yet the lies of Melkor, the mighty and accursed, Morgoth Bauglir, the power of terror and of hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed, and ever and anon it sprouts anew and will bear dark fruit even into the latest days. Here ends the Silmarillion. If it has passed from the high and the beautiful to darkness and ruin, that was of old the fate of Arda marred, and if any change shall come in the marring be amended, Manwë and Varda may know, but they have not revealed it, and it is not declared in the Dunes of Mandos. Thus ends the Quenta Silmarillion. The story of the First Age has come to an end after 22 parts. we will continue this story in the Second Age stories, which is in another portion of the Silmarillion called the Akalabeth. I may do that in one long reading that may or may not be 3 hours long. But I do want to thank every single one of you who has stuck through this entire time, whether you are watching here live on Twitch, or a replay on Twitch, or on YouTube. Thank you. I did not expect any of my nerd ramblings on TikTok 7 months ago to turn into this, but it has been an absolute pleasure to read, to explain, to chat with all of you. Thank you so much. We will end the YouTube portion here. Keep an eye out on the Discord channel, the TikToks, and the Twitch for future readings. If you are watching this and it is before Sunday, August 1st, we will likely be reading again Sunday, August 1st at noon, the Second Age stories, which is where we get a lot of Aragorn's ancestors from Numenor. In the meantime, we will end today's YouTube video with an enormous thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was so much fun. This was so much fun. YouTube, I will see you all later. Thank you so much. I can't say any more than that. Much appreciated. Goodbye.